Yeah, we are in public session. To assist the committee in considering this matter of the preservation of biodiversity and ecosystems in peatlands, I am very pleased to welcome, on behalf of the Department of Culture, Heritage and Gaeltacht, Dr. Seán Canney and Mr. Brian Lucas, both from the National Parks and Wildlife Services, from Bord Namona, Dr. Catherine Farrell, Head of Ecology, and Mr. Seán Canney, Land and Property Manager, from the Irish Peatland Conservation Council, Catherine O'Connell, Chief Executive, and the Irish Wildlife Trust, Pádraig Fogarty, Campaigner Officer. Before I ask you to address the meeting, I wish to draw to your attention to the fact that by virtue of Section 17(2)(l) of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence to this committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to qualified privileges in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise or make charges against any persons or identity by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. I also wish to advise you that the opening statements and any other documents you have submitted to the committee may be published on the committee's website after this meeting. Members are reminded of a long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the House or an official, either by name or in such a way to make him or her identifiable. To commence our discussion, I will call on an opening statement from the Department of Parks and Wildlife Service, Dr. Seán Ó Cuív and Brian Lucas. I may take statements from other members also as we go along, and then I will ask the TDs and Senators here to have any questions to raise on these issues. So, to start with, Dr. Seán Ó Cuív and Mr. Brian Lucas.
Thank you, Chairman. If it's okay, I'll make the presentation on behalf of the Department.
Yes, please. I
would like to, first of all, to thank the committee for inviting the Department to make a presentation today. Peatlands cover approximately 20% of the state's land area, and their use has implications across a wide spectrum of public policy. Intact peatlands produce an array of nature-generated benefits to society, known as ecosystem services. These services provided by peatlands include water retention, which can reduce flooding, water filtration and supply, climate regulation via carbon storage and cultural benefits. Bogs are, of course, an important habitat in their own right and an important breeding ground for many species, including highly threatened species such as the curlew. Ireland's peatlands, occurring as raised bogs, blanket bogs or fens, are unique on a global and national scale. Ireland recognised the importance of these peatlands and took steps to protect the best remaining bogs through designation as Special Areas of Conservation, also known as SACs, and Natural Heritage Areas, also known as NHAs. Between 1997 and 2002, Ireland nominated 53 raised bog sites for designation as SACs. 75 raised bog NHAs have also been designated under the Wildlife Amendment Act of 2000 to supplement the raised bog SAC network. Ireland has also identified 50 areas as SACs for the protection of blanket bog. A further 73 sites containing blanket bog habitat have been designated as NHAs under Irish law. 67 sites have been selected for conservation for one or more Habitats Directive Annex 1 fen habitat in Ireland. Ireland has approximately 60% of the remaining raised bog habitat in Western Europe. The original area of raised bog in the state was approximately 311,000 hectares. Most of Ireland's raised bog peatlands are no longer of ecological interest as they have been cut over. It is estimated that 10% of the raised bog area is suitable for conservation. For conservation purposes, there has been a need to restrict turf killing on a number of sites to protect the best of our remaining active raised bog habitat. The National Raised Bog Special Areas of Conservation Management Plan 2017 to 2022 approved by the Government and published in December 2017, sets out how the raised bog special areas of conservation are to be managed, conserved and restored, and how the needs of turf cutters are to be addressed. The National Restoration Programme for Ireland's raised bog, special areas of conservation and natural heritage areas is contained within this plan. It is intended to restore all designated raised bogs within 3 cycles, with the first cycle operating for the duration of the management plan. Site-specific conservation objectives have been published for the 53 raised bog special areas of conservation and restoration plans drafted for these sites, to be developed further in partnership with stakeholders, including landowners and local communities. Site-specific restoration plans for the raised bog natural heritage areas are also currently being developed by the Department. In order to allay concerns in relation to the potential impact of restoration on areas of land adjacent to the protected bogs, the Department is in the process of developing drainage management plans for the special area of conservation sites as part of the National Restoration Programme. Restoration measures on raised bogs involve the insertion of peat or plastic dams to block surface water drains, to restore more natural physical conditions, and the re-wetting of the bog to raise water levels close to the bog surface to restore peat-forming conditions. Raising the water table should not flood the land surrounding the bog, but will ensure that it remains wet enough for the growth of sphagnum moss within the protected site. Restoration measures may also include tree felling and scrub clearance. Work on the restoration programme has already begun with a €5.4 million project, The Living Bog, which is co-funded under the EU Life 2014-2020 programme. The Department is managing this project and is contributing €1.352 million, as well as expert ecological resources and know-how, with the European Commission providing €4.056 million. The Living Bog project is the single biggest raised bog restoration project ever undertaken by the state, and, as well as physical restoration work, there is a key focus on involving local communities. A large-scale community outreach programme is currently underway in towns, villages and schools, and community-led amenity provision is currently at an advanced stage. The project will provide for sensitively designed amenities at a small number of the project sites, such as walking trails, bird-watching facilities and signage. The Living Bog project, which commenced in 2016 and will conclude at the end of 2020, aims to restore the favourable conservation condition and increase the area of active raised bog by 277 hectares, or 58%, on the 12 raised bog special area conservation project sites. This will contribute to the national objective of achieving favourable conservation status for active raised bog in Ireland. Restoration works were completed on 2 Life Project special area of conservation sites in 2018, Mongan Bog SAC in County Offaly and Gariscal Bog SAC in County Westmeath. Some 1,500 peat dams have been inserted, blocking some 16,000 metres of open drains. Restoration works are currently underway on 3 other SAC Life sites, Carnagapple Bog SAC in County Galway, Ardnagullion Bog SAC in County Longford and Moyclair Bog SAC in County Offaly. In tandem with the LIFE project, the National Parks and Wildlife Service of the Department is undertaking restoration works on state-owned lands within the protected raised bog network. Restoration measures on state-owned lands were completed last year on 2 raised bog special areas of conservation, Kinsalla Bog in County Galway and Drumalloch Bog in County Roscommon. The Department worked in partnership with Gaeltacht to complete some of the restoration measures. In addition, it liaises with Bord na Móna in relation to the restoration and rehabilitation plans of that company. Further restoration works on state-owned lands are planned to be undertaken in 2019 on a number of raised bog protected sites. Landowners and other stakeholders are notified in writing in advance of the commencement of restoration works on land in state ownership. All restoration works are being undertaken in line with best practice as set out in the guidance document, Best Practice in Raised Bog Restoration in Ireland, which was published by the Department in 2017. As well as the LIFE project and restoration works on state-owned land in protected sites. Between 2018 and 2019, the Department expects to invest around €300,000 in community engagement projects. This is in addition to the, on average, €4.46 million per annum paid to turf cutters under the Compensation Initiative to conserve raised bogs. Given the significance of Ireland's raised bog resource at an international level, conserving the best example of our peatlands habitats is of itself something Ireland should be doing. It also fulfils Ireland's commitments under the EU Habitats Directive. It will also have benefits for Ireland's commitments under international climate change targets by improving the carbon flux balance, particularly in relation to carbon dioxide, methane and dissolved organic carbon in water, and by providing a host of other ecosystem services, flood attenuation, water regulation, amenity value and biodiversity. Irish peatlands are a significant carbon store containing more than 75% of all the national soil organic carbon. On average, peatlands are estimated to hold over 1,500 tonnes of soil carbon per hectare. That is about 10 times as much as a typical mineral soil. Functioning peatlands capture or sequester carbon from the atmosphere and store it in the form of peat and vegetation. When peatlands are drained or damaged, the peat oxidises and the carbon is released back to the atmosphere. Peat oxidation can be stopped or reduced through the restoration of sites and hydrological management measures. The least damaged Irish peatlands can actively sequester on average 57,402 tonnes of carbon per year over the whole country. These are mostly bogs that have been selected for nature conservation purposes.
About a minute left.
Just there.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
The Department is working closely with other government departments and agencies to consider further the role wetlands restoration and rehabilitation can play in achieving the objectives of the National Mitigation Plan and potential synergies with other environment-led schemes. A working group, including representatives from the Department, has been established by the Department of Communications, Climate Action and Environment to formulate how accounting for managed peatlands can be achieved in the context of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and in compliance with the relevant EU legislation. Chairman, I would like to thank the members of the committee for their attention, and we will be happy to try to answer questions that they may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, for your opening statements on behalf of the Department of Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht, and for all who will be making giving statements here. Remember, your full statement will be on the website after, so for people to look at if they want to, and maybe try and keep it maybe to 5 minutes, or a little bit 5 minutes, if humanly possible. The second statement here today is from Board of Mona, Dr. Catherine Farrell, Head of Ecology, and Mr. Seán Canney, Land and Property Manager.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Catherine Farrell. I'm the Head of Ecology for Board of Mona. I've been working on conservation and restoration of peatlands since 1996. I'm joined by Stuart Connolly, Land and Property Manager, Board of Mona. We'd like to thank the committee for inviting us today. And I suppose in the light of the time, I'm going to reduce some of the paragraphs of my statement, so please delve there for all the detail required. So just to say, peatlands are specialised ecosystems. They comprise a range of habitats and species. They're complex and they're unique areas of high biodiversity. Peatlands are wetlands, and when represented in a relatively natural state, provide a range of ecosystem goods and services. Since the 1960s, Board of Mona recognised the value of the bogs as habitats for indigenous plants and animals, and this led to the purchase of a number of sites purely for the conservation of raised bog and fen habitat, as well as blanket bogs in the west of Ireland. With the focus now of the company clearly set on decarbonisation and the short time frame for continued peat production, we look forward to working and collaborating further for the significant benefits of peatland conservation and restoration locally, nationally and internationally. With that in mind, those remaining near intact bog areas within the company's holdings in the region of 4,000 hectares of degraded raised bog capable of regeneration, those hectares are earmarked for conservation and the necessary restoration works to reverse any impacts of drainage. These bogs will play an important role in the National Peatland Strategy and the conservation of active raised bog in particular under the EU Habitats Directive. Iconic species such as curlew and red grouse are using these bogs, and their future management will be critical to sustaining these remnant breeding populations. We have applied machines full-time to the restoration of this nationally and internationally recognised habitat. To date, we have restored 2,000 hectares of raised bog, and a further 2,000 hectares are in the process of restoration. As I said, they're earmarked by the National Parks and Wildlife Service for designation to replace other SAC NHA sites that have either been degraded since the time of designation by ongoing turf cutting in the margins. Some of those sites include the well-known Abbeyleix Bog, Ballydangan Bog, and the Clonbowley-Colleglin Group in County Roscommon. With regard to the remaining Bordemona lands, I'll discuss the nature of these against the backdrop of the wider national peatland resource. So as we know, over the past centuries, peatlands have been extensively used for afforestation and drainage for agriculture in the 1900s. According to the latest research on mapping peatlands by Dr. Seán Canney of DCU, peatlands account for in the region of 20% of the total Irish land cover. 66% of those are converted to other land use, including agriculture at 27%, forestry 35%, and industrial peat or active peat fields at 4%. A further 20% of the national peatland cover is considered degraded, leaving very few remaining unmodified examples of the original peatlands. Bordemona is the custodian of 80,000 hectares of peatland in Ireland. The company was established in the 1930s with the remit to use our natural resources to provide energy security for the new state and to support employment. And since then we have continued to do so, harvesting peat annually for energy, horticulture and small amounts for animal bedding. In 2018, the company CEO Tom Donlan announced that peat for energy will be significantly scaled down as part of the company's decarbonisation strategy, with limited continued production for horticulture. The company is growing strong renewable energy and resource recovery businesses and developing other commercial options as part of its ongoing remit to provide employment in the Midlands. Of those 80,000 hectares, approximately 50% is currently related to peat production, of which half is active peat fields. 15% comprises undeveloped margins, including bog remnants, areas of birch, etc. 5% is under forest cover, and 30% falls now into the category of cutaway bogs or bogs depleted of commercially viable peat resource. When we were originally established, the view was held that once commercial peat was extracted, the bogs could be converted to productive growing land. And despite huge efforts that continue today, the bogs have largely proven inhospitable for crop establishment and growth, and that includes forestry, grassland, tillage and food. And we've discussed that at other Oireachtas committee sittings. So biomass trials continue on parcels of land in areas where we can manage those areas to establish willow and other biomass species in support of replacing peat with biomass in the peat-fired stations. Since the 1990s, larger areas of bog have been emerging as cutaway, and we have been working to rehabilitate these bogs to develop replacement wet peatland systems, i.e. wetlands and wet woodland systems that can provide a range of ecosystem goods and services other than the traditional use for peat and or land for agriculture and forestry. The best example of extensive rehab is the Lochboer Discovery Park in County Offaly. Since the rehab work began in the 1990s, and work is still ongoing on the margins of this more than 3,000 hectare site, this former bear production landscape is now home to a documented 1,000 plus peatland species. The mosaic of wetland and woodland habitats found there represents a range of ecosystem goods and services, most notably space for walking and enjoyment of the outdoors for all levels of human ability. It should be noted these replacement peatland habitats are not akin to the former raised bog ecosystems that predated peat production. They do, however, comprise poor fen, rich fen, wet grassland, reed swamp, open water and wet birch woodland, all habitats that were present prior to the formation and which led to the formation of the Great Bogs. Where we can restore recognised raised bog ecosystems, we will continue to do so, as highlighted already. The rehabilitation of the Owenini bogs in County Mayo has involved the rewetting of up to 6,500 hectares of industrial cutaway blanket bog that have now been shown to be reverting to diverse peatland ecosystems, as well as switching already from carbon sources to healthy carbon sinks. Once peat production is stopped in an area, or in the lead up to that time, the Boardnamona rehab approach involves establishing a detailed baseline ecology and drainage map of the cutaway bog, followed by targeted internal field drain blocking and management of external outfalls. The methods have been developed over 30 years of rehab activity, working with local community groups, NGOs including IPCC and Irish Wildlife Trust, and the statutory bodies such as National Parks and Wildlife Service, EPA and local authorities. To date, 15,000 hectares of cutaway bog has been rehabilitated using these approaches, with 5,000 hectares in active rehabilitation as we speak, and those are in the Littleton Bog Group. We have highlighted that peat production will cease over a large part of our lands by the mid-2020s as peat burning is phased out. In the interim, rehab measures will continue to be carried out with the focus on rewetting and rehabilitation of the cutaways in line with national policies such as the National Biodiversity Action Plan, Climate Change, Water Framework Directive, etc. This will result in a further extensive network of replacement peatland habitats, wetland and woodland systems that will provide an expansive landscape for species and habitats otherwise marginalised by agriculture, forestry and peat production. This new landscape will also provide other ecosystem services such as water filtration, attenuation and reduction of carbon emissions from the formerly drained peat production lands. Results from the work to date illustrate that nationally and internationally significant numbers of wintering birds are using the rehabilitated sites annually, and that breeding bird populations, particularly of wetland species within the sites and in surrounding areas, are also enhanced. So I guess since my time is coming near its end, I'd like to highlight that we've brought copies of our Biodiversity Action Plan, which is the main vehicle that we use for consultation, and that we're also in the process of developing natural capital accounts for our lands. This is using the United Nations system of environmental and economic approach, will enable the company to demonstrate how our transition from active peat production to rehabilitated and recovering peatland systems in terms of water, climate, health and well-being can be transform all our lands at this important time for us. We thank you for your time. We extend a warm invite to all the members of the committee to view and explore the outcomes of the bog restoration work, as well as the fruits of the rehab work at the Lochbower Discovery Park, to see firsthand what we were endeavouring to portray in what was meant to be a 10-minute but now a 5-minute presentation. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Catherine Farrell, Head of Ecology from Boardnamona, for your opening statement. I move on to Catherine O'Connell, Chief Executive from the Irish Peatland Conservation Council, for your opening statement.
Thank you, Cahirsach, and Ministers and TDs present for the opportunity to address you this afternoon. I'm representing Irish Peatland Conservation Council. So peatlands are really regarded as one of the harshest environments on the planet, and that's because they're waterlogged year-round, and the species and animals of plants that grow there need to be specially adapted in order to survive there. But IPCC say that the peatlands are superheroes, and the reason for that is that they provide these important functions, such as purifying water, sometimes mitigating flooding, and providing a home for rare plants, animals and biodiversity. And they beat nearly every other ecosystem when it comes to carbon storage. And on top of that, they're a very important part of our cultural heritage, and they have an immense recreational value. So in Ireland, at the moment, IPCC would contend that we have 275,000 hectares of peatland with a conservation value. And this includes fens, raised bogs and blanket bogs. These are all peatlands that are rare and extinct elsewhere in Europe and the world. And this quantity of land represents 23% of the original peatland area that we had in the country. The rest of the peatland area has been man-modified by industrial and private peat extraction, forestry, grazing, land reclamation and other uses. When Dutch peatland scientists came to Ireland in the 1980s and saw the extent and speed of the degradation of our peatlands, they took two steps. The first was to encourage the formation of our organisation to campaign for the conservation of bogs. And then the second thing they did was they raised funds within the Netherlands to purchase 3 peatlands in Ireland. And once these sites were bought, they donated them to the Irish people with the simple message: conserve your peatlands while you still have pristine examples remaining. The Dutch logic here was that a peatland in pristine condition costs very little money to manage and protect in comparison to a site that's damaged and which needs costly repair. So the Dutch peatland managers ended up spending millions of euro trying to restore their lost heritage. So despite this friendly Dutch advice, the current Irish peatland conservation scheme is not working. We've reached the stage where we need to invest millions of euro to protect our peatlands, or risk a future where a sod of turf will be a peculiar item on display in a museum cabinet. Several factors have led to our present critical situation and are likely to drive certain peatland types to extinction unless action is taken. First, and there's a couple of pictures here onwards in my illustrations to illustrate the points I'm making. First, damaging activities on designated sites are occurring due to inadequate regulation. For example, on figure 1 there, if you're having a look through, allowing turf extraction using digger and hopper machinery on Slieve Tuhi, SAC in County Donegal. That means, and not the second example there is figure number 2, which just happened over Christmas 2018, and that was not enforcing planning law, which allows developers to drain peatland for horticultural peat extraction, and that's Dooleystown Bog in County Meath. That's an example of what's going on there as we speak. And the third thing I want to highlight is providing permission for a wind farm development within the Loch Derry Duff west of Ardara, Blanket Bog SAC in County Donegal. And the third picture is an air photograph there of the intact Blanket Bog where that development was given permission. Sorry, I just lost my place there. Yeah. The other thing I would say about wind farms is that IPCC have analysed 10 years of the work that we've done on wind farm applications. And we are absolutely at a loss to know why. Never in the history of that time has a county council ever cited the intrinsic value of the peatland and its habitat as the reason for objecting to a wind farm development. So that tells you something about awareness of this whole issue. The second big point I want to make is that the lack of management on sites that have been designated is really causing degradation to continue. And this in turn is driving species and habitat losses. So according to the National Parks and Wildlife Service reports, they describe the peatland habitats as drying, shrinking, cracking, slumping and eroding. If you look at the reports produced by National Parks and Wildlife Service on the status of EU protected habitats and species in Ireland from 2007 and 2013, you're going to see that within the peatland array of sites, status of bogs are moving from bad to increasingly bad over this 6-year period. So, for example, there's a diagram there, figure 4, just from that report, shows raised bogs through the lack of consultation on restoration plans. Oh, sorry, let's move my place. That's just, yeah, beg your pardon. And the other point I wanted to make is that with raised bogs, because of a lack of consultation on all the plans and everything that have been written, we're still not able to get down to the process of actually managing all of those sites, and that is facilitating further loss because these habitats are degrading as we speak, and species such as curlew and large heath butterfly are at risk. The last point I want to make is that the unprecedented delays in designating fens, raised bogs and blanket bog sites, engaging with the landowners involved and setting conservation targets for these ecosystems means that sites cannot be protected from damaging activities, nor can restoration begin, and this is perpetuating loss. This seems to be due to a lack of government commitment, a lack of personnel and inadequate funding. What can we do to stop the loss of our peatlands? On the positive side, we have the peatland strategy. We have the raised bog management plan in place. Some communities are engaged in the process of managing sites, and a considerable body of knowledge and research is available about how peatlands work. So on the other hand, though, progress is constrained by the need for more staff within the National Parks and Wildlife Service, who could then conduct the surveys we're talking about, consult with the landowners, set conservation targets and carry out management work. And of course, on top of all of that, we need more money to facilitate all those things. So IPCC have been in existence for 37 years, and our work of saving bogs is entirely funded by private individuals. To date, we have spent €4 million buying bogs, campaigning and educating children. This must be proof, if you need proof, that there is a positive attitude from the public towards conserving peatlands. But we need to commit to delivering peatland protection by engaging with people, by bringing every voice into the process and being transparent in all the decisions being made in relation to the management of our conserved sites and peat resources generally. This is what it will take to turn the tide and provide a future for Irish peatlands and their wildlife. Chair, thank you very much for inviting me in. And if I might just say that I feel there are two groups missing today. The first is the biggest landowner of peatland in the country, that would be Gaeltacht. And the second would be a fairly big land user, and that's the Turf Cutters and Contractors Association. Thank you.
There's one of them here.
Okay.
And another supporter here.
I'm chairman of it, just you'll know.
Mr. Paddy Fogarty, Irish Wildlife Trust.
I'll field anything that you want.
We're very grateful for the opportunity to address your committee today. I'd like to thank you all for your attendance. The Irish Wildlife Trust was founded in 1979 for the purpose of raising awareness of Ireland's unique wildlife and its importance to people, while also promoting better protection for nature through national policies and legislation. We are a registered charity with a membership base of about 800 people, with a headquarters in Dublin, along with branches in Waterford, Galway, Laois and Offaly, Kerry and Dublin. Much of the work we do is undertaken on a voluntary basis. The work of the IWT and other organisations like us has become all the more pressing in recent years as the full scale of the planetary ecological crisis becomes apparent. Scientists say that we have perhaps 12 years remaining to avert dangerous climate breakdown, while in October of last year, a report from the World Wildlife Fund and the Zoological Society of London showed that 60% of large animals have disappeared from the earth in only the last 40 years. Indeed, it is widely believed that we are in the midst of a mass extinction event, which is leading to the collapse of ecosystems and which has very uncertain consequences for us all. This has affected Ireland as much as any other country. Over many thousands of years, Ireland's unique geography and climate has produced peatland and bog landscapes which are of global significance. In historic times, they were home to a diversity of habitats and wildlife, including vast woodlands and wetlands, with teeming birdlife and specialised plants. These landscapes were also inhabited by people. There is evidence that turf was harvested for fuel going back many hundreds, if not thousands of years. The IWT accepts that turf cutting for domestic use has a long cultural heritage and that those people have well-established turbary rights which should be respected. However, we must also acknowledge that major changes have occurred in more recent decades that have had calamitous consequences for our peatlands. It is no exaggeration to say that the raised bogs of the Midlands are practically extinct. According to the NPWS, less than 1% of the original area remains active. That means capable of growing peat, while no raised bog has survived intact. The vast blanket bogs of the west and upland areas have fared little better. Only 28 are deemed to be worthy of conservation. The remaining 72% have been drained for agriculture, turf extraction, or are buried underneath a carpet of plantation conifers. Even those blanket bogs with so-called protected areas, such as special areas of conservation, special protection areas, etc., have been subjected to overgrazing by sheep, uncontrolled fires, and unregulated turf cutting, activities which are all leading to their deterioration. Of 11 habitats on peat which are listed for special protection under the EU's Habitats Directive, 9 are in bad condition. 1 is inadequate, and only 1 is good, according to the NPWS. With habitat degradation comes extinction, and according to Birdwatch Ireland, 10 birds which are characteristic of peatlands are on their red list, meaning they have suffered catastrophic declines in population or breeding range, namely the golden eagle, the red grouse, golden plover, dunlin, curlew, twite, whinchat, nightjar, meadow pipit and ring ouzel. A number of other birds like the skylark, the hen harrier and the short-eared owl are on their amber list. The hen harrier is currently threatened with the prospect of more planting of conifer monocultures, which will destroy its habitats. Wind turbines are being inappropriately erected on peatlands, where their contribution to climate goals is likely to be less than the greenhouse gases being released by the degrading peat, while at the same time harming water quality and aquatic life downstream. We have to acknowledge that conservation measures over the last 30 years, limited in extent and late in coming as they were, have been a colossal failure. This has left us with serious challenges in meeting legally binding commitments on climate change, water quality and nature preservation. But more important than that, it is a tragic loss of heritage that today we cannot show our children what a healthy bog looks like. It is a legacy that few will thank us for. The National Peatland Strategy was published in 2015 and set out to comprehensively map a path towards the wise management of all our peatland areas. It sets out a path towards meeting conservation aims as well as the many other competing interests. In our view, it fails to deal in a meaningful way with existing forestry plantations or upland farming. However, the IWT was broadly supportive of the strategy. Nevertheless, its implementation to date has been mostly disappointing. While authorities were quick to de-designate 46 natural heritage areas, that's NHA areas identified in the 1970s as being nationally unique for their biodiversity value, we have yet to see even the list of proposed new NHAs which were supposed to replace them. We have seen no progress towards setting conservation objectives for blanket bogs, and promised management plans have not materialised. The NPWS committed to finding a way of accommodating turf cutters while ensuring conservation objectives in those areas could be met, but we are no wiser in 2019 as to how this can be achieved. Meanwhile, turf cutting and habitat loss continues. The strategy committed...
Shorten it up a bit, because if we want to read all the rest of it out, it will take another 5 minutes.
Yeah, and if it's just that we were told that we would have 10 minutes, and if you don't mind, I did spend a lot of time putting this together.
We limited the rest to 5 minutes.
Well, I think other people got to read their statements, if you don't mind.
All right, shorten it up as much as you can, please.
The IWT welcomes the publication last year of the National Raised Bog SAC Management Plan, and we are grateful to the NPWS and the other stakeholders for the work that went into this. Hopefully it will secure the future of these special places. We also commend the restoration efforts being undertaken at 12 of our raised bog SACs by the Living Bog Project. Also the CAN project, which is a 9.4 million cross-border environment project which aims to improve the condition of blanket bog habitats and to support priority species found at 25 EU designated SACs across Northern Ireland, the border region and Western Scotland. We are encouraged by European innovation partnerships being run by the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, one of which is working with scientists and farmers in upland areas with the aim to restore the hen harrier population in special protection areas. The community of Abbeyleix in County Laois has undertaken a remarkable project to rescue and restore their local bog, something which has been championed by President Higgins. We would also like to commend the work of the Bord na Móna ecology team, which has been working on the restoration of 15,000 hectares of industrial cutaway bog. The Lochbura parklands in County Offaly show that large-scale ecological restoration is not only technically feasible, but can also be popular with local communities while stimulating small-scale sustainable enterprises. Despite this, many communities remain in the dark as to what the future of their local area holds. The IWT would like to see the ecological restoration of all of Bord na Móna's 80,000 hectare landholding, but we are keen also that local communities will be central to the decision-making process. We have been told by local community groups that plans for a Shannon Wilderness Park have been stymied by lack of engagement from Bord na Móna and the drive for wind farms which are unwanted by local communities. Although the current state of our peatlands is not good, there remains an incredible opportunity where the right policies to be put in place. Fixing these important ecosystems can help us to clean our water, lock up carbon, regulate flooding, stimulate local economies and restore wildlife populations. The IWT would like to see new solutions for upland farmers so that they can make a good living while protecting nature. We would like to see Coillte convert their plantations to native woodlands or, where appropriate, restore blanket bog habitats. We would like to see Bord na Móna repurposed so that the Midlands could be home to one of Europe's largest landscape and nature restoration projects. We urgently need for the peatland strategy to be energetically implemented. The National Parks and Wildlife Service should be leading an education drive to show people the wonders of our peatland wildlife. To date, unfortunately, we have not seen the level of vision or enthusiasm required to meet these goals. A cloud of neglect and apathy has smothered the natural world. It is a terrible legacy that we are leaving to the next generation, but it doesn't have to be this way. Legislators like yourselves have the power to take action and give our children a brighter future. Thank you very much, Cahill.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. I suppose just a couple of questions myself that I have concern about in relation to Bord na Móna and the loss of jobs for people. What consideration has been given to these people now? I mean, 500 were told were to lose their jobs, have lost them or are about to lose them, and then that all Bord na Móna turf cutting is to cease by 2025 or 26. What provision is being made for to provide jobs for these people, seeing that that there is still peat to be had, and there's still a necessity for it, for people use it for the different methods of heating houses. I suppose that's one of my questions. The other concern that I have is in relation to blocking drains and raising water levels. And going back in history, we know what happened in a place called Guinea-Willa, where the bog actually moved and covered houses and did away with a whole community, and only one child, because she was gone down the road 3 miles to a neighbour's house, survived that terrible tragedy. How sure are we that something like that doesn't happen in the future by doing this? And are we also infringing on neighbouring landowners' farms? If you raise the level of the water in one place, it's surely going to raise it upstream if the water can't get down to a certain level. So are we going to be impacting or causing problems for neighbouring landowners? And the other question in relation to the Healy-Rae and designation of lands, and I listen to this a lot from where I come from, where farmers have no problem with designations, and Healy-Rae designations or any of the other designations, if they're properly compensated and for neutralising their land or making their lands worthless. It's fine for anyone to come in here and say we should promote the Healy-Rae or promote whatever other ecosystems, but give no consideration to people's fortunes as how they're going to keep going, how they're going to provide for their wives or families or whatever, send them to college like everyone else, and to basically put food on the table. And these ideas are all very grand, and we're listening to people saying you can't eat meat, you must cycle bicycles, you can't have a pint, and now we can't heat our homes. We must be perished with the cold. We must remain cold. Many people have the only facility they have in their places is to cut turf to keep themselves warm for the winter. It's generations have lived this way, and it's fine for people to make suggestions, but they must make to suggest that they can't do it anymore. But alternatives must be provided, economical suggestions must be provided or put out there and made available to the people that these suggestions are, and some of them are ridiculous enough, are affecting the people who are trying to live in rural Ireland. Oh yes, you may want to answer that first.
Here, look, just I suppose first in relation to the jobs issue, you know, as we face the extent of decarbonisation and what that means for us as a society, Bord na Móna have had to embark on a major programme of transition. I suppose the key thing is that we're very conscious of the mandate that we have from government. That mandate, first and foremost, is to create sustainable employment in the Midlands, as well as to support government strategy and policy. And we have known of this transition for some time. We have plans in place. We developed a first wind farm in 1992. We invested in a new business in resource recovery in 2007. And while the situation is now urgent, we are very cognizant of the impact that the transition can have on employees and on the wider economy of the Midlands. And we are actively looking to bring sustainable economic activity to those areas. And we believe we can do that in a way that's also consistent with managing and living up to our obligations from the point of view of biodiversity. As I say, we certainly see that there's a consistency with the type of developments, commercial developments that we do. We are a commercial semi-state. We need to be commercial, but we will do so in order to support jobs in the Midlands and also to protect and enhance biodiversity as far as possible. As regards flooding, I think my colleague might answer.
Yeah, but just with regard to the approach to re-wetting and rehabilitation of the bogs. So what we're talking here about is in order to facilitate milled peat production, which you're all aware when you're working with peatland systems, to dry the peat you've got to dig drains. So what we have is we have an extensive network of field drains within our bog units. Our aim is not to flood the bogs. It's essentially to raise the water level within, to bring the level up to the peat surface. Now, within the topography of the cutaway bogs, there will always be depressions. So inevitably, we do get a mix of open water, but then on the other areas, it's really just to bring the water level back up to the peat surface to encourage the establishment of those peatland species that are the target species that we want back on the sites. So our rehabilitation is generally done on a 3-phase basis. Okay, so you go in, and before you do anything, you do a flood risk assessment in terms of looking at water levels. So as you rightly say, a lot of the drainage works within the Bord na Móna lands has actually facilitated development of agricultural lands around the Bord na Móna bogs. So an important part is what will happen when we block the field drains, so you have to carry out a flood risk assessment. So the 3 phases are looking at the internal field drains, slowing the water movement down within the peatland to trap water on site to stop the summer drying and to facilitate the vegetation establishment. And then at that point, after a couple of years, 2 to 5 years, you assess the potential for blocking outfalls off the bog. And then after that, you will look at, is everything okay here? Right. So at each of those phases, we have ongoing consultation with the communities and the people on the edges of the bog. So it's talking to the farmers if they have concerns, and this is one of the activities that's ongoing down in Littleton in terms of any re-wetting that we're doing. You've got to go in, you've got to walk the land and ensure that their concerns are heard. And then, of course, you've got roads adjoining the land, so all of that is considered. And all of that is combined with monitoring, because sometimes, you know, the bog, you know, presents surprises. But in our history of rehabilitation of 20,000 hectares, we've dealt with any surprises, and thankfully we haven't had any negative impacts on surrounding lands. So just to alleviate concerns in that respect.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Connolly, one question. There was 500 people have lost their jobs in Bournemouth. That's what we've been told. Have all those people been put into? Have they been given other jobs? Have they been employed elsewhere? What do they do now?
Well, Deputy, as I said, we're in the process of transitioning. There was an announcement in relation to job losses, and unfortunately there will be job losses among our colleagues. That is something that we're working through at the minute, and we have a programme of transition ongoing at the minute. So there are people coming out of jobs in the near future. The company has engaged in a detailed support facility through the company for our employees to look at other opportunities, look at upskilling, and we have a programme of benefits and, as I say, facilities there for employees. So this is something it's ongoing. It's not, I suppose, a case where there's a sudden closing of gates and people no longer are employed. This is a more gradual, albeit it is over a period of months, that we will see a significant number of people unfortunately departing. But the company is giving them every support that they can. And I guess the key consideration for Bournemouth as well is we have to look at the wider community of the Midlands and the economy of the Midlands, and we're actively looking at other opportunities to try and provide further and different and more sustainable employment for the people of the Midlands.
Thank you. Deputy Michael Fitzmaurice.
First of all, thanks for your presentation. To Brian Lucas. Brian, I just want clarification on this, because this is a damning sort of an allegation to say about someone illegal digging and hopper turf cutting in Slieve Toohey and Donegal. My understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that on Blanket Bog, where the sausage machine cut one time, that it is on the Blanket Bog, because this is in Donegal, this isn't one of the 53, that it is not illegal to cut turf on the Blanket Bog with a hopper and a track machine. Is that correct?
But generally in designated sites or sites proposed for designation, there's what's called activities requiring consent, and generally require the consent of the Minister or of another public authority. So currently for the Blanket Bog designated sites, the special areas of conservation that I referred to in my presentation, you do not need the consent of the Minister to cut on an existing bank.
Correct.
So if the bank is there and it's being cut, as deputies have said already over the generations, then the current position is, under the activities requiring consent regime, you do not need the consent of the Minister for Culture, Heritage and Gaeltacht. If you wish to open a new bank, then you must get the consent of the Minister.
There's an allegation here, Ms O'Connell, you might come in and admit about a contractor in Donegal. Now, it's pretty easy to know somebody that has a 312 Caterpillar digger and someone that has a Fiat tractor and a wheel hopper in Donegal. This has come in your presentation to this committee, and it's on a Blanket Bog, and from what I can see there, it has been where a sausage machine worked before. Is that advisable to make an allegation like that in here about someone in Donegal?
Thank you, Deputy Fitzmaurice. It really illustrates...
No, I'm asking the question about that contractor. Or you said illegal turf cutting, illegal digger and hopper turf cutting. First, Slieve Tui, SAC in Donegal.
Yes, I said it in the context that
Yeah,
I
but
understood...
no, you named the bog.
Yes,
there's a
I
digger there.
understood
Neighbours of that person would know it. Is that misleading information?
No, I don't think so.
So you're saying that that's fact? That I can contact that person, show them this, you're making that allegation?
In 2000
Yeah, but are you heard what Mr. Lucas said, that it is permissible to cut on the blanket bog. You heard what he said?
On an existing bank of turf.
Yeah.
But there was new turf being cut,
No,
it was being put into.
On an existing bank. So, just to clarify before we go any further on that, because that's, in my opinion, that's not good to make an allegation in a place. You know, it's dangerous to come out with a photo and put a thing over it for somebody, regardless of who they are. I don't know the person, but I certainly will find out to make an allegation against someone.
Okay, thank you.
In the line of Bord na Móna, first of all, Katrina...
Sorry, just through the chair. There's one thing for us all here. Making allegations. If I was to make an allegation against somebody, the chair would be on my back, like a shot. No. This doesn't, whether you agree with being allowed or don't agree with being allowed, that's not the issue here. The issue here is quite simple. That a statement was made here at the committee. Illegal digger and hopper, turf cutting in Slieve Tui. I'm asking the chair to ensure that the record is corrected, because it would appear from what Mr. Lucas said that that is a statement that has no foundation in fact, and that we need the record cleared on this one, just for the record. Now you can say ill-advised, you can say kind of a cutting I don't agree with, but you can't say illegal. That's the issue here.
Thank you for clarifying that. I'd accept that, Chair. I would accept that.
Will you withdraw?
Yes, I'll withdraw the use of that word. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. To Bord na Móna, Katrina, I know that you're doing works in several bogs around the country. There are a few things. Why is Bord na Móna persisting at the moment in the Midland bogs when you talk about preserving bogs? And I know that you're doing, look at Dangan and a lot of places that you've done a lot of work in, or Ballydangan. And in the Midlands, you have put in application for a lot of wind turbines around near Mount Dillon, which will take basically digging out a lot of bog, putting in roadways and digging out serious areas to put up the turbines. How is that, when you talk about conservation, that is still going on? Second of all, in the line of the consultation, and you talked about it there, I know that you're at a Timon bog at the moment. Well, farmers around there have told me that there has been no consultation with them in the line of, yes, there's some bogs near it, but there would be land as well. And I'm just wondering, or would ye, if I actually invited ye, I have an email sent in already to ask ye, would ye engage with the people in that area? Thirdly, in the line of, as brought up by Deputy Healy-Rae, the 450 jobs, that's redundancies, I think. I don't see where there was any plan for other jobs than that. And fourthly, in your land division, or in your year moved from the west of Ireland, to put it bluntly, that there will be no jobs west of the Shannon producing anything in the line of peat for Bord na Móna. In the restoration of bogs, would it not have been a good idea to hold some from Derrifada or areas like that, machine people that would be, have great expertise down through the years, because obviously anyone that worked out in the bogs, they were driving machines. Would it not be advisable to give them priority, even if it only took 2 or 3 years, and said, well, we'll give you the redundancy after that, or get another job? I know that it's, from my understanding, on Willow, and correct me if I'm wrong, that no headway has been made in the tonnage, and on the fish project, I think it will be 7 years. So there's no immediate sort of rainbow in the horizon for those workers in those areas that will give them work, especially in a lot of rural areas. And I'd just like you to comment on that. Now, I think that does the whole committee agree, or say the different witnesses agree, that we're in here talking about we've gone on to climate change and all the different things. It's the Habitats Directive that was the reason the 53 bogs, and let's be clear on that, to preserve them, because Europe, as Ms O'Connell rightly pointed out, parts of Europe had dug away all they had. And I just want clarification on that. To Brian Lucas, we are at a stage at the moment, and I think all witnesses, I'd like them to comment on this. We're at a stage at the moment where you will solve no problem in this country, whether you like it or whether you don't, unless you bring the landowner with you and the community with you. And whether people like that or don't, because the reality of it is, while Katrina talks about something like 80,000 hectares or whatever Burnamona has, a lot of private people either have turbary rights or ownership of their bog. And in fairness to the national parks, and I will say in fairness to Brian Lucas, over the last 2 to 3 years, he has tried to get, where is possible, relocation sites as close to people as possible, which is acceptable, and I want to make it clear that I'm chairman of the TCCA, to move people from A to B where there is quality turf and where it's near enough them, 4 or 5 miles from them, right? And they are working on that at the moment. Would the witnesses agree that it is not helpful when you're trying to preserve those 53 or 57, we'd call it, because a few of them, like the Moy has 3 different bogs. Would you agree that it's not helpful that when the likes of the national parks or other interests, in fairness to Peatlands Council or whoever, when they're trying to get a small area bog, because bear in mind there could be a 3,000 acre designated bog and you might want 50 acres or 100 acres to sort the people. And would you agree it's not helpful, from what I have seen, especially in Kildare in the last month or two, of objections going in, because the reality of it is, and whether people want to like this or not like it, if I own a bog in a so-called SSC, I don't know what the SSC yet, and other people around the country, well, I'm not going to leave in that into I have the obvious choice of another bog. Simple as that. And if we want to solve the problem, the environmentalists that I've seen objections coming in from, and others, not alone them, if we want this problem solved, every time an objection goes in or a refusal comes in to put people from where one of those raised SAC or so-called in parts of the country are, then we will end up not solving the problem. And that's bread and butter stuff. And until you get the people on board, and in fairness, the national parks are doing that at the moment. They have the likes RPS doing the science, and allegations has been made in here already about the science that we're down to 1%. What did we know we had? Was there science to back it up? In the 80s, and before the Habitats Directive came in 1997, it is now estimated that our science was up to 40% wrong. Well, if I start 40% wrong at something, I can never get it right. And in fairness, there's a full re-evaluation being done of those bogs to know exactly where we're going, what you can restore, degraded bog, what you can get going, how much active raised bog we have. And in your view, do you agree that there should be some benefit if one of those SACs down the road or is performing well, that on the carbon sequestration that you talk about, Now, and bear in mind that we're dealing with the Habitats Directive at the moment, but down the road, if someone's bog is doing well, should there be carbon credit financial reward for it? In fairness to the national parks, in the re-wetting of what they have done, and I presume, in fairness to Bordamona probably, other than what I've mentioned in the timing, they are liaising with communities so far. Yeah, there is problems in certain areas, there's no point in saying there's not, but they are liaising with communities as far as possible. And in the line of Pádraig, you mentioned, and you talked about sheep. Farmers were farming the way they had to farm down through the years, right? And then there was a destocking of the sheep on the mountains, and you spoke about this, that the sheep destroyed the mountain. But in fairness, there was a destocking, and that part of it, I think, is being sorted at the moment. But do ye agree that if you're a farmer in Connemara, or a farmer in the hill in Sligo, or a farmer below in Donegal, and you have a few cows that go up on the side of the mountain, or your sheep, and if you want to put up new stakes in that, is it a fair thing that that farmer has to go for planning permission? Because I think it is wrong. You're obliged under the Department of Agriculture regulations that you have to keep your cattle from not mixing, and at the same time you have to, you're not allowed to do a fence. And I think there are certain things that Brian's department needs to get to grips with that says if there was a fence there, put up a fence. Because this crack of putting people in their own land through that type of torture in planning permission, and some genius will come in then, of course, and object. In the line of the raised bogs, to Catherine, you talk about the Dutch, and you're right, I think it was Queen Beatrice or whatever. The Dutch, they're mighty. They cut all their own away, isn't that correct? They cut all their own away. And they came back here then telling us what we do and what we wouldn't do. Like, fine.
I don't think that's actually correct.
Well, the Dutch cut all their bogs away.
Yeah, but they never came over here and told us what to do. That's one thing they did not do. They were much more diplomatic than that.
Well,
thank you.
They came back to buy bog.
Sorry.
They came back to buy bog in this country. They cut their own away, and there's plenty of them trying to tell us what we can and cannot do. But the reality of it is they're quite entitled to buy bog wherever they want. I don't mind where they buy it. But the reality of it is they cut their own away first before they ever realised the value. Second of all, we are exporting, you know, in this same country where we are telling someone that cuts 5 or 6 hoppers for their own house, we are telling them they cannot go up or they're a criminal, as against Germany, England and several different countries, including Holland, taking different types of mill peat for be it sewage systems and all of that around the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Morris. Deputy O'Cuív, have you any questions?
Yeah, a few questions. I think there are two very different issues here. There's the blanket bog and the raised bog. I'd just like to address myself to the blanket bog first. My memory is that we have quite a large area of blanket bog that's designated SAC or NHA. And that the limited turf cutting that goes on in the blanket bog doesn't have the same knock-on effect across the bog that cutting of raised bog has, because it tends to be much shallower and because the drainage system tends to be different. And I'd like it that could be confirmed. And of the total bog cutting, there's two questions that I think arise here in terms of turf cutting in blanket bogs. Domestic cutting of blanket bog as a percentage of the total preserved blanket bog. Have you any idea what it is? Because my memory again was that nationally domestic turf cutting was about 4%, and that commercial turf cutting when we started back in '97 was about 96% of the actual volume cut. But you might let me know of blanket bog how much is active turbary at the moment, but I have a suspicion that will be relatively small. So the threats to the Blanket Bog, you mentioned destocking. Now, some of the officials here might remember the initial destocking back in, I think it was 97 or 98. And we had the courage to take on what was not a very popular issue. But I learned one of my first lessons in irrationality in that process, and why it's hard to get things to move forward. The Irish government at the time, and the department, decided that the quickest way of getting a rapid destocking before we went in and measured every bog, and we'll come to that in a minute, was to take 30% off everybody, get on with the job immediately, because Europe were putting the pressure on. But I remember an extraordinary visit to Europe that teaches me the danger of people making principle out of practicalities. And it was basically this. We went over and said the Irish government, out of Irish exchequer funding, are willing to compensate the farmers for the loss of income. I thought they'd say, well, isn't that great? No, that's fine. But they said, no, 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 you can't do that. That's rewarding the polluter. And under the polluter pays principle, you can't pay them even. And I said, but it's going to be our money. We're not looking for any EU money. We're willing to pay them, but we cannot take the income, 30% of the income away from our farmers, and just say it doesn't matter because that's their livelihood. Now, we did pay them. It took 7 years for the department, if my memory serves me right, to get permission from Europe, and I didn't give a damn. Because as far as I'm concerned, I wasn't going to take the bread out of the mouth of farmers up and down the West Coast. So this agenda always seems to work on the basis that we want you to take the pain, but we don't want to compensate you for the pain. And if ecologists want to know why their agenda ain't working and why they meet resistance on the ground, it's for the very practical reason that if I go to any professional round town here and say 30% of your income's gone tonight, sorry, it has to be done for the greater cause of some other greater cause, well, I think you'd know there'd be a fair few thousand people outside the door there if you did that to them. And as I said, in this case, it was clear-cut. We were paying. We weren't asking Europe to pay. Now, the second thing about destocking the sheep, and I've had this argument time and time again with the department and with other people, and I have had people who are very knowledgeable about sheep who would agree that, you know, when you look at the history of overstocking in the first place, Europe caused it by the headage payment. That's a simple, absolute fact. Europe caused it. Because they said every ewe you have, it doesn't matter if you never had a lamb, we're going to keep paying you. Well, what do you expect the farmers did, but they put more and more ewes in the hill. Distort the market, and you're going to get a distortion. Now, when they went to the destocking, in my view, they left the person who knew the individual hill out of the reckoning, i.e. the farmer who had been doing it in most cases right until the ewe premium came in, and it was still in their knowledge how to farm those hills in a sustainable way, and they've been doing it for generations until the market got totally distorted. But we brought in a whole lot of people who were not used to hills, but who were agricultural planners, and we gave them the job to decide in some empirical way how many sheep the hill could keep. And I think our department officials have known that I have always believed that that didn't take the complexity of the way the sheep roamed the hills into account. The next issue that arose, of course, is, and I think it would be very interesting if you looked at your bogs to find out whether I'm right or wrong. There was a huge encouragement to farmers on the hills, and certainly in Galway and Mayo, to feed ewe lambs and to feed ewes in the winter time, supplementary feeding. Now, one of the problems with that was, of course, you could keep more ewes in the hill, but there was another problem that arose, that the ewes from a very young age got used to being fed. Now, I don't know if any of you have got a cat, but we've got a cat at home. And our cat does the odd roam around the area, but the one thing the cat will always do in the morning when I get up is sit in the windowsill. Because the cat's cute, and the cat knows if they sit in the windowsill long enough, I get up from breakfast, go out to the back door, get out the tin and give the cat some food. Now, luckily, the windowsill's not going to wear away. But if you do the same thing with sheep, they know where the food is. They know where the food is going to be given out. And they all congregate on the lower, boggy or softer peats. And hey presto, despite the fact you've destocked the hill, on those peats you get a huge amount of damage, nothing to do with absolute stocking levels, but on to things that farmers were told were good farming practice. That they traditionally didn't do. They allowed the hill handle what the hill could handle. And there are certain grasses die back in the winter time of the hill, and they actually determined in the old days your stocking level. So this needs complicated, farmer-involved answers. And this comes to the next question, the policy of the state. And in another committee that was well reported this week, and I actually didn't seek any publicity, a big issue arose. And that is that we go on at platitudes about high nature farming, about the value of the ecology and the value of all these hills and high nature areas and NHAs and so on. And an awful lot of our hills where the sheep are is either NHA or SAC, and I have no problem with that, or SPA. I have no problem with any of that. But I then have a problem is when somebody turns around and says, well, that's fine, but we'll only pay you your single farm payment, your basic payment scheme, and your greening, based on the the number of sheep you can keep, and we cut the number of sheep you can keep, and we'll only pay you on that, and we'll discount in terms of economic value, totally, the high nature value of this, that these farmers have to farm in a very, very peculiar way, because they have to keep a very, very sensitive ecology in balance, and if they don't, they destroy what we've got there. And until, sorry, because I want to come to an important point, and I'll ignore the blanket box until we come back again. And until we realise that a Minister of Agriculture saying, I won't give the payment on one side for the high nature farming, is undermining MPWS and the Department of Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht, and that we need a joined up thinking, you're going to get resistance on the ground. Not only that, but you're going to get land abandonment and you're going to get depopulation. Now, unless we get all of those ducks in a row, it's always going to be a them versus us. One of the last things I did when I was Minister was to say, well, all these designations were there, and I think it was in Claregalway we organised a meeting to say, well, okay, if we're going to have all these designations in the West, can we get all of the environmental organisations down to tell us how we can make a few bob out of all these designations that we're told are so important that all the people want to come looking at them? And how can we get alternative employment for all the people? Because we're taking the bread out of the mouth. Because in the end of the day, people need a livelihood. And therefore, I think that often this debate can be, ignore the fact that the main custodians of all of this are the people on the ground, but they have to live. And that there are simple remedies, but the big vested interests in this country do not want to apply those remedies because there's their attitude, if you're on bad land, you should do it for the cause. But if you're anywhere else in the country, you should get paid for doing it for the cause. And sorry, Chair, and you've been very indulgent. Can I just say one sentence on the blanket bog? And that is that in my case, it was 50 years ago, I had an aunt who was an ecologist, a botanist. I can remember 50 years ago her warning that the Midland bogs were in danger. I think one thing we did do was when we designated the bog back in 1997-98, when Seán Canney was Minister. I think it's fair to say that we took an awful lot of the big commercial operators out, and we approached Bord na Móna. There's more to be done. But I think we should also recognise that where we are now, in particular with the Bord na Móna, have moved a huge way forward, and we just need to keep working away. But again, the same principle arises. You have a population there, They have a right to jobs, to livelihoods. If you take one crust of bread out of the mouth, show me where the other crust is and that it's as valuable a crust, if not more valuable. And it needn't be in the same type of industry, because I remember there's one thing that I regret. It wasn't in my constituency. But in my view, when the sugar company in Tuam was inevitably going to close, and it was as inevitable as the day was light, that the community made a mistake because they tried to hang on to the sugar company. In my view, if they'd looked at their own children and the education they were getting, if they'd have been smarted and insisted in getting a government office down there with 400 jobs, because their kids were much more likely to work in a government office than they were in a production line in a sugar company. But don't just think we can walk out of the Midlands and leave it as a black hole. All you have to do is think of why did Offaly win All-Irelands? Why was there a population there to win the All-Ireland in hurling and football for one simple reason, Páird na Móna?
Thank you, Deputy Cuív. Deputy Ó Cuív and Deputy Fitzmaurice have put quite a lot of questions. I'd appreciate if you'd be able to answer them. Who would like to start? Brian?
Yeah, but will I address it first? Yeah. Just, I suppose there have been a lot of questions, so hopefully I'm going to capture as many of them as I can in my answer. But I guess first, just in relation to Deputy Fitzmaurice, to clarify in the first instance in relation to the current redundancies and the retention of skills, and we're very conscious of retaining skills that we can put to future use. And the current scheme is an entirely voluntary scheme, and I think that's something that should be just borne in mind.
Just one correction. Aren't you requesting 450 redundancies, yes or no?
We have sought redundancies, but on a voluntary basis, Deputy. And that's,
am I correct in saying that you require 450 redundancies?
We have, you know, as our CEO has outlined, our strategy is in the first instance we have to consolidate our existing businesses. We have to react to that in order to ensure the future sustainability. And I guess, you know, to go to Minister O'Keefe's point, that, you know, where we stop providing one crust of bread, we need to look to try and provide another crust. We're very conscious of that, very, very conscious of that. And we are actively looking at other opportunities. I think while, you know, we've made the announcement and we're transitioning out of peat, this is something that's going to happen over the course of the next decade. We know that that's not a very long period of time, but it does give us time. It's time that we're not going to waste to try and find other opportunities. In the area of aquaculture or inland fisheries, I'm not sure where the 7 years come from. It's not certainly a timeline it's not a timeline that we would certainly subscribe to, and particularly in the context of the fact that we have a pilot aquaculture plant, or I should say facility, which is in operation in County Offaly. So we've already started on that process, and we would be doing everything we can to try and move that forward, as we will other opportunities, Deputy.
I take your point, what you're saying. I take your point, what you're saying. No, I just want to get in on one quick point. I take your point, what you're saying, but the reality of it is, in Galway Port, Páird na Móna had people working. Is that correct? It was redundancy. In Sligo, it was redundancy. Now, it is going to be, whether we like it or whether we don't. I'm not saying you're wrong, by the way, but the reality of it is that you're looking for 450 redundancy. They are 450 people, unfortunately, that has probably families that hopefully will get employment somewhere else, but the day they take the redundancy, they are unemployed as a statistic. But the fear I have in those areas, as Deputy Ó Cuív pointed out, Offaly will always tell you the year they won All-Ireland was because so many of them was working in that area, either with Páird na Móna or as a job because of it. And what we have to make sure, and there's no magic wand, and I understand that, but the reality is that when you look at those areas so far, it has been redundancy and nothing else. Would you agree?
Yeah. Well, Deputy, just to, I suppose, to answer, you know, Páird na Móna, as with every other organisation, we have to respond to our customers, and we have to work to government policy, and indeed as a commercial semi-state in particular, we have to work to government policy. Unfortunately, the whole decarbonisation policy change, and I suppose it has been coming for some time, from both Europe and from our own government is something that the markets are forced to react to, and that has an effect on Bord na Móna as a commercial semi-state as any other. I think the key thing, Deputy, that we'd like to reinforce is that we are very conscious of our mandate towards the Midlands in particular and sustainable jobs. Excuse me. And we are making progress in relation to other alternatives. As I said, we have the aquaculture programme, which is currently in trial. We're about to move to trial in the area of utilisation of cutaway bogs for the production of herbs, for example. And there are other things that we will be working very hard to try and provide that new crust of bread for the people of the Midlands over the course of the next decade as we transition. But this is a transition that will take place over a period of time, and we're committed to work over that period of time to find those alternatives.
I think just to follow on, you had a couple of questions around the wind farms. The wind farms on peatland. So to that very point, we are in a transition phase, and part of that is trying to ensure jobs. So as an ecologist, sure, I'd love to sit here and say there'll be wetlands and woodlands and restored bogs all over the place, but we have to maximise the commercial use as well, and these cutaway bogs present themselves as a good opportunity for renewable energy projects. So instead of going in and digging out loads of peat from perhaps an intact bog or even from an intact blanket bog SAC, locating these wind farms on the cutaways, you're actually going into an area where you have more shallow peat remaining. You have an infrastructure, you're located next to the grid essentially. So we have to pick the right sites for wind farms and pick the right sites for the wetlands and all the other things that have to go with it. So reducing peat production, rehabilitation and restoration and renewables. So that's all part of the decarbonisation story for Bord na Móna. In terms of a timing, I'd love to meet you on the bog in a timing, so that's no problem. We started a process there in November, and my colleague Barry O'Loughlin has been doing great work. We met the local co-op down there. We've looked at the drainage of the site. I was down there myself last Monday morning in the cold, and I was down there 2 weeks before that to make sure that any work that we're doing isn't impacting on adjoining lands. There is water flowing through the site. There's great potential for re-wetting of the peats there for the regeneration of sphagnum and for the regeneration of peat-forming habitats.
Are you talking about just two sides to it? Yeah.
Well, there's two bogs.
Yeah,
there's a Timon and Cloonkeen, so I was in Cloonkeen, and I'm aware that one of your constituents is interested in continuing to cut turf in a time, and so I'd be delighted to meet you down there to save all the other members having to listen to our boring conversation. In terms of IPC licence in general, so just to be clear, we have a remit to rehabilitate all of our peatlands post-peat production. Okay, so we rehabilitate to stabilise the ground on which peat production occurred. Okay, so that means drain blocking and natural processes of regeneration of the typical peatland species, or whatever species will grow there, to stop any further erosion and ideally to stop further carbon emissions. So that's all with the EPA. You know, there's a legal obligation there, and we have to do that on every site. And whether the locals can see it or not, we have to do it. So in order to be compliant and to do the right thing, we have to go through that process and ensure the EPA are happy, but also working with the communities. And that's how it will happen in Derry Fada. So obviously in Derry Fada, you know, the bogs are out of peat production. There's stockpiles remaining on site. It's relatively deep peat. What we need to do is decommission the bogs, which means taking off the rail, taking off any plastic, doing all that work, but also working with the lads on site, using the expertise, the likes of Paul Quinn, who I'm sure you know, who's mapped every site and bit of bog down there, and we don't want to lose that expertise because they are critical for us. In terms of ecologists, there's currently 4 of us on our team. And when we go out to map or develop the rehab plans, the first port of call are the bog lads, the men on the bog who actually drain the bog. Because if you know how to drain the bog, you'll be damn sure you know how to re-wet the bog as well. So they are key, and they're the ones that we actually get to do the work as well. So that's in terms of the dairy fodder. And I'd be quite happy to meet you down there too, because there's a lot to be learned from the rehabilitation, and no more than Catherine and Pádraig as well, for all of us working together, and Kieran and Brian, on restoring and getting peat formation going on those particular sites as well.
Just to finish for Board Namona, I think this is kind of the last of the questions that came our way in relation to, I suppose, the impact of the whole decarbonisation and the re-wetting of bogs and peatlands on local economies and communities. I suppose one of the key things that has been said on many occasions is that the re-wetting of bogs helps with greenhouse gas emissions, and it is a positive thing, and that's that has been proven in studies. And I guess as a community, as a government, we need to look at what that means for communities as well. And if there are communities who are actively managing their land, or if there are landowners actively managing their land in order to give a benefit on the whole carbon balancing exercise that we're carrying out and water indeed, well then that's something that we need to look at. And in fairness, I think it shouldn't be something that has to be borne entirely by the people who are making the sacrifice, if you like, to do that. And there needs to be an acknowledgement of that in government policy, that there would be compensation for people who provide this valuable service, I think, which has been acknowledged by everybody as a valuable service to the greater economy and world economy even.
Can I maybe just make the point that it shouldn't be called compensation, it should be called payment. And the reason I'm saying compensation, then someday we'll run short of money and say, well, there's no compensation, we don't need to give it. Where payment is something for goods produced, you get paid.
Yeah, and I think that's
I know it's kind of a subtle question, but but it's one.
I think that's one of the reasons why using the system of environmental and economic accounting, it's getting a system where we can start looking at payment for ecosystem goods and services provided by that hill farmer, for ensuring good water quality, for enabling those populations of freshwater pearl mussel to survive, and the same for the farmers on the edges of the bogs that might want to get involved with the restoration and rehabilitation and be part of a future network of peat scapes, which will assist the National Parks and Wildlife Service and all of us here in reaching our targets for nature.
I agree with you, Katrina, but the only thing, and you know this as good as I know it, and it's blocking us all from this, the procurement process. There might be a guy with a small digger beside a bog in wherever, and you might love to take them on. But the problem is that the procurement process of the transparency cannot take, you have to go through all that, and that person may not be in that system. That's the reality on the ground, where the bigger guy is sort of more into the price and procurement thing. Because procurement, I've seen it with all the contracts that have been gone out, it is for the person that, say, would be coming from dune drainage for a farmer, or maybe cutting a bit of turf or whatever. That small guy, the procurement process is just out and gone from them. That's the reality.
Can I hear just one quick brief response? I think, Deputy O'Cuív, you're quite right, and it's an important distinction that you've made. And I need to correct myself in using the word compensation, because quite rightly, this is a service that people will be providing in our battle on the decarbonisation front. And I think you're quite rightly pointed out that it isn't a compensation. They're actually providing a valuable service that should be paid for.
From the department, Brian Lucas, please.
Just to take up on the points made, Deputy Fitzmaurice talked about the need to bring landowners and communities with you. And this is something that the government has set out in the programme for partnership government, that there's a recognition that turf cutters have a right to cut turf, which is balanced on the conservation obligations on the state. And in my presentation, when I talked about the national raised bog Special Areas of Conservation Management Plan, I did say it sets out how the raised bog special areas of conservation are to be managed, conserved and restored, and I think as importantly, how the needs of turf cutters are to be addressed. So in terms of what the department has tried to do, we have an annual payment scheme, and under that scheme for cessation of turf cutting on the raised bogs, we've made over 18,000 payments amounting to about 27 million euros. In my job over the years, I've met turf cutter representatives and I've met turf cutters on quite a lot of occasions. And one of the points for quite a few turf cutters, they say, look, I'm getting my compensation and I'm reasonably happy with that, or I shouldn't say compensation, I'm getting my payment and I'm reasonably happy for that. But I have to say I do meet turf cutters and what they say to me, look, I just want to cut turf somewhere. It's been in my family for generations and I like to continue on that tradition. It's not just for a source of fuel, but that is an important consideration. But I meet people and they say, look, it's part of my culture, it's part of my heritage, it's part of my family tradition. And in the national plan, we do try to recognise that. What we said is, and what the government said in the programme for partnership government, we will try to accommodate people in non-designated bogs where we can. And we did get planning permission last year to develop two sites, two non-designated bogs for turf cutting, and we hope to develop those sites this year, and we have another similar sites in the process. What we have said as well, and we set that this in the national plan, so it's in the public domain, it's a published document, it's available from the department's website. We see annual payments, accommodation in a non-designated bog. And if that doesn't work for some reason, because it can be quite hard to get a site, a non-designated bog for turf cutting, we will try to use the Habitats Direct. And there's an article in the Direct that allows for cutting on an SAC so long as you don't damage the integrity of the site. And that's an important point to make. You cannot damage the active or the degraded raised bog. So we set out in that national plan the sites that we are looking for to see would that work as an alternative. So it's payments, accommodation in a non-designated bog, or the use of Article 6.3 of the Habitats Directive. I just wanted, just on the conservation, it did come up in some of the questions about the target. So for the raised bog network, for the SACs and the NHAs, the target is to get to 3,600 hectares of active raised bog. Deputy Fitzmaurice also brought up the issue of planning permission and fencing in sites, and it's an issue that I've had landowners raise with me over the years. Generally, planning permission or fencing would be exempt from planning permission. The issue is, as I referred earlier, to activities requiring consent. So in a designated site, it could be an activity requiring consent of the minister or of another public authority. So what would happen is if someone came to the department or came to the minister looking for consent, we'd have to carry out an appropriate assessment screening. Now, if the proposal to develop the fence or maintain the fence screened out as not requiring a full appropriate assessment, then the minister would be in a position to give consent. The issue is then, if a full appropriate assessment is required, it brings that activity into the planning system, and that's where planning permission may be required. Now, I've had a case that a landowner came to me and he says, I've been told by a local authority that I need planning permission to put up a fence. When I spoke to the local authority about the case, they did say they would have engaged in they had offered an invitation to engage in pre-planning consultation to see whether the activity might have screened out. So it doesn't necessarily mean you would need planning permission to put up a fence in a designated site. It would require screening, and it would, the result of that screening would...
Sorry, just on one point of clarification though. There was a case in Connemara where Galway County Council actually gave an exemption, put up a fence, a roadside fence, and if you know where Ballinhinch is, Ballinhinch Castle. And somebody, we just want to explain where the problems arising in the hills. Somebody then complained about the exemption to the board planner, I think it was Peadar Tóibín, and the board planner then gave a ruling that I think might have related to scenic designation as opposed to SAC, that all those had to get planning permission. Now, it's nothing to do per se with MPWS, but it's to do with the integration of all the different systems, which means that on one hand you're trying to keep the sheep in off the road, and the other hand the cattle, and on the other hand somebody say you have to get a planning permission, and it does all get very messy, and one side of the whole thing doesn't seem to know what the other side's doing, and we're getting these independent bodies giving us decisions and they're getting crazy results.
Brian, and this is where we have a major problem. There's the person that owns the land, that farmed it for so many years, has certain restrictions put on them. And if they have to go down a route of getting an appropriate assessment or screening out or whatever, right, that costs money. We're dealing with farmers that are living on less than half the average industrial wage. And those things put in front of them will bring around an Ireland, and whether you wish it or whether you don't, it won't be good. An Ireland where you will see certain amount of land abandonment. And whether we like it or whether we don't, we come from a managed landscape. And the ewe going up the hill, or we saw in the bird and the cow going up, when they took it off it, it was detrimental to it. And unless we work with those communities to iron out those things, and that it's not you, I'm not saying about just the national parks and its own, it will involve planning as well as the planning authorities as well as the national parks, but it will also involve the more people that keep objecting to things of someone putting up a fence that wants to keep their sheep in, or someone that wants to do a relocation bog for the betterment of the overall Habitats Directive. And the more that keeps happening, remember one thing, you're still dealing with people in their own private property, and it's like a dog, if you keep pulling their tail, they'll bite you.
Thank you. Just finally, because we have about 10 minutes, have you any more statements?
There was some questions from Deputy Ó Cuív about the blanket bogs. Dr. O'Keefe will answer those. Yeah.
Please, Dr. O'Keefe.
Just to say, first of all, that I think we do genuinely agree with you in terms of what you were saying, Deputy Smyth, about bringing people with you. I think there's a very wide recognition of that. And one of the things I would point to is that some of the really big successes in nature conservation have been the Burren programme, which started off as a life project. We've one going in Kerry on the Pearl Mussel at the moment. We've Arran Life, which just finished there a few months ago and is being now replaced under the IP scheme. And in all of those, what it's about is harvesting the farm and knowledge that the landowner has and using that to get to a place that you want to get to. And going back to the point about compensation versus payment, and paying them for the service that they provide. Just in relation to the blanket bogs, you asked, do we recognise that limited cutting within blanket bogs is less, generally speaking, they are more tolerant of cutting? Yeah, we do. It depends on issues like topography. There was actually, Slieve Tui was mentioned earlier, there was a very serious landslide a few years ago, which all I can say is it followed on immediately from, I think, sausage machine cutting along the slope, which just called the speed.
That wasn't Hopper.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't Hopper.
And I think one thing, and this goes back 20 years, that there was actually a huge amount of consensus around, and that is that all the farmers and local people that I was dealing with on the ground absolutely recognised the damage of the sausage machine. And things happened, as you know, maybe they shouldn't have happened. But basically, the vast majority of people, certainly in Connemara, wanted the sausage machine out because it was destroying in one season. Bog just absolutely. And I don't think anybody really.
Can I just say one thing? Yeah. I used to go to another meeting for F3. Okay, thanks for your presentation.
I think we can all agree that the sausage machine should never have been there. Not to mind it. Yeah. And it should have been gone 20 years ago, and we thought we got rid of it. Whatever happened when it went from arts, heritage, Gaeltacht and the islands over to environment, it seems to have made a recovery. It should never have happened. It was gone in 1999, 2000, and it should have stayed gone. There was no justification for the sausage machine, and I think, I would never ever defend it. It was just totally destructive. But the farmers never defended it either. So just a few people at it.
Okay.
Can you just give me the figures of the total amount of SAC and HASPA blanket bog we have? Was it 240,000 hectares or something?
My recollection is it's about 141,000.
Yeah,
we can check that out and
well, yeah,
come
but
back to you.
give or take. And my memory was, are you saying 3,600 hectares of raised bog? I think that's what you said there a while ago. There was a figure I used.
That's the target for
Yeah.
conservation.
Yeah.
The conservation target is 3,600 hectares to get back of active raised bog between the SAC and NHA network.
Yeah, but like that's 141,000 as opposed to 3,600.
Well, I think Dr. O'Keefe is talking about the blanket bogs.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So 141,000 hectares of blanket bog.
In the SAC network.
SBA, NHA network.
Yeah.
And about 3,600 you're hoping to get to in raised bog, just to get orders of magnitude of hectares.
Could I just clarify a point, Chair, on that the... Sorry.
Sure that Dr. O'Keefe is...
Yeah, well, one figure is the target, and then the other figure is total amount that we think is in the SAC, in the Natura network. But it's a different thing, because obviously you're trying to get the bog to grow again at all in the raised bog. That's the target. Whereas in the blanket bogs, it's a different situation. It's a substantially different situation.
Is as is.
And I think we might have discussed this a while ago, that we have done work based on aerial photography, which indicates that there is still a very substantial proportion of the blanket bog network that is little impacted by cutting.
Yeah, exactly.
There are various other impacts, but cutting tends to be confined largely along roadways, for example, and so there's a network of cutting as opposed to necessarily big areas through and through.
Did you want to...
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Deputy O'Cuiv, that the 3,600 hectares of raised bog is a target, that area of land sits within a bank of bog in the region of 10,000 hectares at least. So just,
in my memory, the figure that we used to use was 8,000 hectares, which is near the figure you're talking about.
And in terms of cutting on blanket bogs, IPCC would be quite concerned that cutting on blanket bogs isn't discussed outside the context of all the other threats that blanket bogs face, and that's the sheep issue which you've alluded to, plus the idea of wind farms, general erosion occurring, and forestry, and the legacy that all of those uses on the land have actually left. So I think to just kind of home in on blanket bogs and saying, oh, it's not too deeply affected by turf cutting, that might be slightly simplistic. I think blanket bogs, every single blanket bog in our list of conservation importance has a damage and a threat to it currently.
Oh yeah, but can we just again clarify an issue? My understanding is that you will not get permission for two grounds. One, that doesn't give deed class, and secondly, because of SPAs, NHAs, etc., you won't effectively get any permission to plant NHAs, SPAs with conifers.
It's very difficult because...
You won't get a grant for doing it. You mightn't be able to stop your planting, but nobody's going to plant
it would be very difficult because it has to pass appropriate assessment.
So it's a virtually non-starter.
And it's very difficult, yeah.
And would I be not right to say that on all those SPAs, NHAs, SACs, the 141,000 hectares, that would be very hard to get a planning permission, because in most of those cases you have to build roads and whatever into your wind farm, and that wouldn't be allowed either.
For wind farming, it would certainly be very difficult,
Yeah, that's what I understood, Thanks.
And finally, Patrick.
Thank you, Healy-Rae. I just want to make a final brief point that addresses a lot of the issues that have come up. The way we do conservation in Ireland has been a disaster. It certainly hasn't benefited nature conservation, and you could attest that it hasn't benefited people living in these areas either. The examples we have where nature conservation works is where local people and communities work with scientists and work with state agencies, and when all those things come together we get success. But to do that requires a lot of work, it requires political leadership, and it requires money, and none of those things have ever been given to nature conservation, because nature conservation is not seen as a political priority. So that's the root cause of all of these issues. I think we need some proper leadership, and we need proper funding of agencies like the National Parks and Wildlife Service that can come up with management plans and consultation with the people who live in these areas, and that's, I think, what the future should be.
Thank you.
But you would support the concept in the agricultural payments and paying for ecological conservation
Absolutely. I think we need to change the language. You hinted at it. We need to change the language. Things we talk
Well,
about,
not language,
compensation and areas of natural constraint and things like that, and poor land. A lot of these places are very rich. They're rich in heritage. They're rich in people and wildlife. And we need to be rewarding the people who live there and maintain these areas and work with them. And the projects that exist, the EIP projects that are out there, are all very positive, but they're all very small and they're going very slowly. We really need to ramp up things like are happening in the Burren. I mean, there's been studies that have been done that the Burren is applicable across the west of Ireland. That could benefit a lot of people.
But I have to say I was bitterly disappointed when the cap was coming in 217 to 214 to 220. And I waged a campaign up and down the country, as the good chairman knows, for an equalisation to payments as proposed by the European Commission. And vested interests of the country fought against it. The ecology organisations went to ground.
That concludes our consideration of this matter today. Again, I would like to thank the witnesses, Dr. Seán Canney, Mr. Brian Lucas, Dr. Catherine Farrell, Mr. Seán Canney, Ms. Catherine O'Connell and Mr. Peadar Tóibín. I propose that we continue in private session. It's just you and me.